Lovely, except you forgot the mustache. Is it on straight?
A sitcom set in a German prisoner of war camp sounds like the sort of idea that should have crashed on arrival. Yet Hogan's Heroes somehow turned goose-stepping bluster into one of television's strangest long-running hits. The trick was never that it ignored the war. The trick was that it mocked Nazi authority so thoroughly that every barked order, every puffed-up salute, and every panicked glare became part of the joke. What makes that even more remarkable is that several of the men playing those comic Nazi figures or standing across from them in the camp had real and deeply personal ties to the terror behind the uniforms. Before we start, drop a comment below and tell us which Hogan's Heroes character always stole the scene for you. Klink, Schultz, LeBeau, or Burkhalter? Once you know who some of these actors really were, Hogan's Heroes becomes even more astonishing. Robert Clary.
How was it that you weren't rounded up? How did you manage to escape that day?
Well, first of all, they had lists of the people who will be arrested. Their specific list. I was not on the list. I don't know if I had ID cards with me at that time. I really don't know. But that's why I wasn't arrested. Neither was my half-sister and her younger son. They were not arrested. And also one of the older sons was also married, and his wife was not arrested because she was born in France. At that time, they were arresting just men, and they sent them to Drancy. My two nephews stayed in Drancy for a very short time. They got sick, and at that time, they were not deporting people yet. So they sent them back to their home, and they were very clever. They smelled what was happening. They got some false ID papers, went to Free France, and they joined the underground. That's how they survived.
If anyone had the strongest claim to say this material was too close to the bone, it was Robert Clary. On the show, he played Corporal Louis LeBeau, the small, quick, charming French prisoner who could whip up a meal, run a covert operation, and look innocent while helping blow up a German plant. LeBeau often felt like the camp's secret seasoning. He brought warmth, nerve, and just enough mischief to keep every scheme lively. Clary's real life was nothing like a tidy TV adventure, though. Born Robert Weiderman in Paris in 1926, he came from a large Jewish family and was already performing as a boy, singing on radio and in local productions. Then the occupation arrived and childhood vanished with brutal speed. He and his family were deported in 1942. His mother was sent to Auschwitz and murdered. Many of his relatives were killed. He endured forced labor, camp transfers, starvation, and the constant threat of death. One of the most surreal parts of his story is that performance helped keep him alive. Clary sang in the camps and sometimes received a little extra food because guards wanted entertainment. That's one of those details so bizarre it barely sounds real, yet it captures the warped madness of camp life. A teenage Jewish prisoner could be worked to the edge of death and still be expected to put on a show. History can be grotesque in ways fiction would reject for being too obvious. After liberation, Clary returned to Paris, learned that most of his immediate family had been murdered, and still pushed himself back towards life and show business. He came to America, built a career in theater and television, and eventually landed Hogan's Heroes. Years later, he defended the show by making a sharp distinction between a POW comedy and the Holocaust. To him, they were not remotely the same thing. That clarity mattered. He knew exactly what the real thing looked like, and he also knew the power of making tyrants look ridiculous. Werner Klemperer.
There were a lot of ironies involved with your portrayal of that role, because you and your family did in fact flee Hitler's Germany, correct?
Yes, my dad was a symphony conductor,
yes,
opera
one of the
conductor.
Great maestro, yeah.
Yes, he was. He was really very good. And we left Europe in 1935. I was obviously just about 2 inches tall at that point. I mean, very little.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I wish it was so. Anyway, we left and fled to America. My father was Jewish, and we came to America and settled in Los Angeles. He became the head of the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Werner Klemperer had one of the most memorable jobs on the whole series, making Colonel Klink look important while quietly revealing that he was a buffoon. Klink strutted, preened, panicked, and bungled his way through the war with the confidence of a man who had never once met a mirror he didn't like. He wasn't terrifying, he was vain, gullible, and forever one bad report away from collapse, which is exactly why the role worked. Klemperer's background makes that performance even richer. He was born into a prominent Jewish-German family. His father, Otto Klemperer, was one of the great conductors of his age. The family left Germany in 1935 as Nazi persecution intensified, and they made it to the U.S. while escape was still possible. The timing mattered. Many others never got the chance. Werner later served in the U.S. Army's Special Services during the war, entertaining troops rather than fighting on the front line. But he was still part of the American war effort against the regime that had driven his family out. By the time Hogan's Heroes came along, Klemperer had already played Germans and Nazis before, including in serious projects. But he reportedly took Klink only on one key condition: the character could never truly succeed. That tells you everything. He was willing to play a Nazi officer, but not to dignify one. Klink could shout, threaten, posture, and wave paperwork around like it was a weapon, but he had to lose every time. That insistence gave the show part of its moral center. Klink is funny because he's hollow. He wears authority like a costume that never quite fits, and Klemperer understood exactly how to puncture that kind of pomp. He won 2 Emmys doing it, which feels fitting. Few actors have ever made cowardice look so official. John Banner.
John Banner had a tough time because he was not only German but Jewish. Werner had a very famous father. Otto Klemperer was a great conductor. So he played good piano, and he was very good intellectually. He was wonderful. John Banner was a complete opposite. He was charming. He was nice. He was like a daddy. He was wonderful. And he was married to a Belgian woman who was a fantastic cook, and those were great 6 years. I'm telling you.
Then there's John Banner, the man who turned Sergeant Schultz into one of television's great comic pressure valves. Schultz was round, weary, hungry, suspicious, and somehow always standing 2 feet away from a conspiracy he absolutely did not want to understand. His famous refusal to know anything became the show's running passport to chaos. The prisoners could be tunneling under his boots, and Schultz would still prefer a strudel and plausible deniability. Banner was born into a Jewish family in what was then Austria-Hungary and studied law before acting took over his life. In 1938, while he was touring in Switzerland, Hitler annexed Austria. Banner did not go back. He made his way to the U.S., learned English, and eventually joined the U.S. Army. In one of history's darker ironies, he later found work in Hollywood playing Nazis and Gestapo figures, even though members of his own family had been murdered by the Nazis. That history gives Schultz an extra layer. Banner didn't play him as a sleek villain or proud ideologue. He played him as soft, timid, compromised, and very eager not to become a martyr for anyone's cause. Schultz is comic, yes, but he's also a portrait of moral flabbiness. He sees enough to know something's wrong and lacks the courage to do much beyond covering his own neck. Banner made that weakness funny without making it admirable. Off-screen, he was widely remembered as warm and well-liked, which somehow makes the contrast even sharper. The man playing the most lovable Nazi-adjacent face on television had every reason to despise what the uniform represented. Maybe that's part of why Schultz works. Banner let audiences laugh, but the joke was never really on the victims. It was on the regime and the small, frightened men who kept it running. Leon Askin. Leon Askin didn't appear in every episode, but when General Burkhalter arrived, the room changed. Burkhalter was Klink's superior, a stern slab of military arrogance who looked as if he had been carved from cigar smoke and bad news. He existed to terrify Klink, complicate Hogan's plans, and remind everyone that the Nazi machine had bigger bullies than the man running Stalag 13. If Klink was comic vanity, Burkhalter was comic menace with a blood pressure problem. Askin was born Leo Ashkenazi in Vienna in 1907 to a Jewish family. After the Nazi takeover of Austria, he was arrested and brutalized by Nazis before eventually escaping Europe. He made it to the United States and rebuilt his life as an actor, later becoming one more refugee who would wind up portraying the very kind of authority figure that had shattered Europe. That's a staggering reversal when you stop and think about it. The man barking orders in a TV uniform had once been the kind of person real uniforms hunted. What made Askin effective on Hogan's Heroes was his ability to play Burkhalter as dangerous and ridiculous at the same time. He did not turn him into a clown, exactly. He turned him into the sort of man who believed his own thunder so completely it became funny. Burkhalter stomped in, demanded results, insulted Klink, threatened everyone in sight, and usually left with less control than when he entered. Taken together, Askin, Banner, Klemperer, and Clary gave the show a strange kind of ballast. Hogan's Heroes was still a broad network comedy with tunnels, disguises, and schemes timed to commercial breaks. But inside that machine were performers who knew, in very different ways, what the war and Nazi persecution had actually cost. That didn't make the show solemn. It made the mockery sharper. Now it's time to hear from you. Did learning the real stories behind these actors change the way you see Hogan's heroes? Which performer brought the most surprising layer to the show? Let us know in the comments section below.